On a freezing Christmas Eve, when the world seemed wrapped in lights and laughter, one man stood in the middle of a dim, empty factory floor holding a termination letter that felt heavier than the entire year he had barely survived. Ethan Cole, a single dad who had spent every ounce of strength trying to rebuild a life for his little daughter after losing his wife, stared at the bold red stamp that said fired, feeling as if someone had ripped the ground out from under him. And the cruelest part wasn't the timing. It was the fact that the man responsible was the one person he never imagined would have power over his life again, Oliver Hayes, the confident, cold, and seemingly privileged manager who had always treated Ethan as nothing more than an obstacle. Before the story begins, if you believe in kindness, second chances, and the power of one good deed to change a life, then please like, comment, share, and subscribe, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from, because your support keeps stories like this alive. Ethan walked out of the factory with numb fingers and a chest that felt crushed under invisible weight. Snowflakes drifted down like pieces of frozen silence, settling on his jacket as he traced the familiar path home. Every step reminded him of the promise he had made to his 6-year-old daughter, Lily, that this Christmas, no matter how hard life had been, he would make sure she felt joy again. It had been their first year without Maya, Ethan's wife and Lily's mother, a year filled with grief that clung to the walls of their small apartment. And now, with no job, no savings left, and no plan for tomorrow, Ethan felt as if he had failed everything he had been fighting for. The bus ride home was long, filled with tired strangers carrying wrapped gifts and warm smiles, but Ethan stared at the floor, clutching the letter like a confession. He wondered how he would explain it to Lily, who had left him a little handwritten wish list on the kitchen table that morning, full of innocent hopes he knew he couldn't give. When Ethan walked into their tiny apartment, Lily ran to him with a handmade paper star she had made at school. Her eyes sparkled as she showed it, telling him she wanted it to go on top of their tree, a tree they didn't have because they couldn't afford one this year. Ethan forced a smile, hugging her tightly, inhaling the familiar warmth that reminded him he had to stay strong even when every part of him was crumbling. After she went to bed, he sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at the empty shelves and the flickering streetlight outside the window. Christmas had always been Maya's favorite time, the season she believed brought miracles. Ethan wasn't sure he believed in miracles anymore, but as he watched Lily sleep peacefully, he whispered a quiet prayer that somehow, some way, he could still make tomorrow magical for her. The next morning, Ethan woke to the sound of someone knocking. He expected it to be the landlord or maybe a neighbor, but when he opened the door, the last person he ever expected to see stood shivering in the hallway, holding a steaming thermos and a brown paper bag. Oliver Hayes. The man who had fired him the night before. Ethan felt anger burn up his spine, but before he could speak, Oliver stepped forward with an awkward, almost vulnerable expression he had never worn before. Ethan was too stunned to shut the door, and Oliver, sensing that, slowly explained that he had come not as Ethan's former manager but as someone who had realized he had made a terrible mistake. He admitted he had acted out of pressure, fear, and assumptions, believing Ethan was careless simply because he had seen him rush out early one evening, without knowing Ethan was hurrying to pick up Lily from a school emergency. Oliver's voice cracked slightly when he admitted he had judged Ethan harshly without understanding the reality of his life, something Oliver himself had struggled with since losing his own father years ago and being forced to take responsibility in ways he had never been prepared for. Ethan's anger softened, though distrust still lingered. But Oliver didn't leave. He placed the paper bag on the table, revealing breakfast for Ethan and Lily, and then he handed Ethan an envelope, not a termination letter this time, but a reinstatement and an apology letter signed personally by the company's director, which Oliver had fought for all night. Ethan was stunned, his knees nearly buckling, because not only was he rehired, but Oliver had gotten approval for 2 weeks paid leave so Ethan could spend Christmas with his daughter. Oliver wasn't done. He shyly admitted that he wanted to do something kind this Christmas, something that would make his late father proud, and helping Ethan felt like the first right step in a long time. Ethan didn't know what to say, but the sincerity in Oliver's eyes spoke louder than any explanation. A man he once considered an enemy was now standing in his home trying to make his life easier. Oliver later returned with a small Christmas tree, gently placing it on the table while Lily watched him with wide, innocent amazement. She asked if he was Santa's friend, and Oliver, caught off guard, laughed for the first time in months, a real, unguarded laugh that filled the room with unexpected warmth. Together they decorated the tree, using paper stars Lily made and a few ornaments Oliver had brought from his late father's old collection. The room glowed with soft lights, and for the first time since Maya passed away, Ethan felt a sense of peace sliding back into the cracks life had broken. As they worked, Oliver shared pieces of his own story, how he had been lonely too, how he had messed up more times than he liked to admit, how he had built walls so high he didn't know how to climb back down. Ethan listened, realizing that maybe enemies weren't always enemies, sometimes they were just people carrying their own invisible battles. That night, Oliver surprised Ethan and Lily with wrapped gifts, not expensive ones, but thoughtful. A winter coat for Ethan, since he had seen him wearing the same worn-out one for months. And for Lily, a small music box shaped like a star, which played a soft tune that instantly brought tears to Ethan's eyes because Maya used to hum that song every night. Lily hugged Oliver tightly, thanking him in her tiny voice, and in that moment something shifted, not just between Ethan and Oliver, but in the entire room, as if Christmas itself had paused to acknowledge that forgiveness and compassion could rebuild things even grief had scarred. As days passed, Oliver visited often, helping them shop for groceries, bringing hot cocoa for Lily, and slowly becoming someone Ethan no longer viewed with suspicion but with genuine gratitude. And on New Year's Eve, Ethan invited him to join their small family dinner. For the first time in years, Oliver admitted he didn't feel alone during the holidays. Ethan realized that the man he once considered an enemy had given him something money couldn't buy, a second chance, a restored belief that goodness still existed in the world. And without meaning to, they had also given Oliver something he had longed for, a place that felt like home. If this story touched your heart so far and reminded you that kindness can come from the most unexpected places, please take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe. It truly helps the channel continue sharing stories that bring hope into the world. By the end of the holidays, Ethan and Oliver had formed a friendship built on understanding rather than judgment. And while the world outside was still harsh, cold, and uncertain, inside that small apartment, something quietly beautiful had begun to grow, a connection that healed old wounds and created new beginnings. Lily's laughter filled the rooms again, and Ethan knew he hadn't just regained his job, he had gained a friend who had changed the course of his life simply by choosing empathy over pride. Christmas, a season he once feared would break him, had instead given him a new chapter. Before we conclude, please leave a comment below telling us which part of the story touched you the most. Your words truly matter. And so, on a night filled with soft lights and warm laughter, Ethan looked around his small home, now glowing with hope, gratitude, and unexpected friendship. Everything had changed because one person chose compassion at a moment when it mattered most. And as snow drifted gently against the window, Ethan whispered a quiet thank you, to the miracle he never expected, and to the enemy who became the blessing he didn't know he needed.